friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kayla, and if you're not new, thanks for coming back. Always happy to have you. If you are new here, I like to do a lot of book and lifestyle content here on this channel, so if any of that interests you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, stick around, join us for the new year. I have said it before and I will say it again, that this kind of end of the year wrap up series, last TBRs, last books I hope to read of the year, reflecting on all of my reading and just my year of 2023 is my favorite time of year, my favorite set of videos to make each and every year. And today we're doing one of my favorites, looking back at all of my reading from the past year and talking about my favorite best books of the year and my not so favorite books of the year. First, grab a coffee. Let me know what was your best book that you read this year, what was your worst book that you read this year, anything in between. Leave me a little coffee cup emoji and let me know in the comments down below. Listen, in 2023, I read more than I have ever read any other year, I think, in my life, literally. My goal was to read 45 books, I think, and I read 47. It is the 28th today. As I'm filming this, and I'm sick, so I have plenty of other reading planned, so I expect that number will go up just a little bit for my reading recap for the year. But I read a ton, and I narrowed down a list, but I have to talk about, I think, 6 books that I really didn't enjoy and 8 that I did. So we're gonna end on a positive note, and we're gonna start with the books that I did not enjoy for 2023 out of the 47 that I read. So let's dive on in. If I do not have the book, I will put a picture of the cover up on the screen so you can see that. And as always, the books will be listed. Every book that I talk about will be listed in the description box with the author if you want to go find it. Start with the ones that I don't actually have. This one I don't have. I believe I sold it on Pango. I read The Fine Print by Lauren Asher, which is supposed to be like a Disney World inspired romance, kind of Grumpy Sunshine sort of book with this imagined family that owns a like theme park franchise, and it's very like princess and fairy tale inspired and supposed to be this like most happy magical place on earth, very much like Disney. And there is a cast member that works there who falls in love with one of the owner's sons, who is kind of like basically given a romantic stipulation in order to inherit their will, the will of their father, or grandfather, I don't know, which is problematic in and of itself. But I did not like this book. Let me look back in Goodreads and see what I rated it. It was supposed to be, it was like one of those book talk, booktube books that everybody was freaking out about. It was supposed to be really spicy. I draw a fine line with Grumpy Sunshine. You can be grumpy, you can be like a not super pleasant person, but if you're a jerk, like you're just rude and mean, that's not, to me, Grumpy Sunshine. And I don't enjoy it. Like, literally be mean to your partner in the name of Grumpy Sunshine. It just doesn't work that way. Because Goodreads doesn't do half stars, I gave this 2.5 stars, but on Goodreads it looks like a 3. I didn't find the romance super compelling. I really did not like both of our main characters, both the male and the female romance protagonist. Did not like this Grumpy Sunshine situation, and it wasn't doing it for me. The rest I have pulled out and are actually being listed on Pango this week. I've just been kind of like stocking up books to list. I was really disappointed that I didn't like this one because I think I really hyped it up for myself, and I watched a lot of creators that really enjoyed this series. One of my students really enjoyed this book, and I just wasn't into it. And that was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. It got too twisty in the last third of the book, and it felt kind of like the ending felt intentionally complicated and confusing, and not like we're solving the mystery and it's really hard to figure out, but I'm just like throwing things out of left field for you to throw you off the track, which felt really unsatisfying for me as an ending. I will say the main character goes on this whole quest to solve this adventure, I've been in a fantasy brain, goes on this whole quest to solve this mystery, and then almost lets the murderer get away and like go flee the country. And I'm like, really, you did not solve this murder to let that person walk free. Okay, I forgot one book on my list. I think I just tried to forget that I read it. That one was also a 3-star read for me. Yeah, I tried to forget that I read this book. It was Survive the Night by Riley Sager. It was my first Riley Sager book. I read the premise of this and I thought it was going to be really good. It is a thriller mystery where this girl hitches a ride home in the 90s. She's kind of dropping out of college. Her best friend has recently been murdered by a serial killer, and she goes to like the campus ride board and finds somebody who will drive her home to Ohio. She comes to suspect on this very long ride in the dark that the person that she is riding with is the serial killer, in fact, that killed her best friend. Y'all, the last 40 pages of this book were a literal fever dream, and not like a fun fever dream, but like a I'm ill and I'm hallucinating kind of fever dream. So many random things happened, and it was very similar, I felt like, to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, where it was just like we're pulling things out of left field and dropping them in this book. You thought this guy was the murderer. This lady that you thought you could trust is actually a psychopath and related to you, and you don't even understand. Like, none of these people, I think we had at one point 3 different people suspected of being the killer, and none of them were actually the killer. In the last maybe 50 pages of the book, last 10% of the book, I would say, because I listened to this on audio, and I remember driving around and being like, what in the world is going on? It almost got to a point where it was like comical how many things were just being like pulled out of thin air and thrown into this book. It was distracted, it was messy, it felt very like gotcha, but not like an actual well thought out thriller mystery, and I just did not enjoy it. I gave that book 2 stars. I got to the last 10% and I was like, I might not even finish listening to this book because I don't care anymore. Like, this just doesn't make any sense. Okay, every summer I read a Sarah Dessen book. They are quintessentially summer for me. So this year I read The Moon and More. I think it's the only one I had on my shelf that I hadn't read yet, so I picked this up. This was something. This is about this girl named Emilia who lives in Colby. Her family owns a beach house rental company and she works there. She has on the surface what seems like a very perfect life, so the back of the book says, but from the start of the book she very clearly doesn't have a perfect life. She has a boyfriend who cheats on her. She has a lot of complicated issues with her father, relationship issues kind of almost with her mother, though she loves her mother very, very much. But her biological father is very clearly a jerk and has caused some trauma. In the beginning of the book, her boyfriend cheats on her, and the next day she goes on a date with a film student who is in town to film a documentary on one of the residents of Colby. Like, within 24 hours she's kissing somebody else. New romantic partner is also terrible. He is so unlikable and selfish, and I don't like it. Emmeline also loses a lot of herself, being like fascinated and fixated and infatuated with this new person, and it was not good. And I'm trying to remember, because towards the end of this book I was just reading to be done with it instead of like not finishing it, which I don't know why I do. I think she just ended up back with the original boyfriend and kind of in the same place, and it was just like, Sarah, what was the point of this? Like, girly, this one was not that gripping romance that I always look for. Ruby Spencer's Whiskey Year by Rochelle Bilow. This was supposed to be like a fun, flirty romance set in the Scottish Highlands. I did not enjoy this. I did not enjoy this book. I'm a Scotland girly. I love the UK, I love Scotland. I have wanted to go to Scotland forever. I'm planning a trip to Scotland and Ireland. So I went into this ready to rock, like Scottish Highland modern, like little rom-com moment. Ruby Spencer is like 35, living in New York, doesn't really know what she's doing with her life. She moves on a whim to a small town in the Scottish Highlands to research and write a cookbook for 1 year. While she's there, she finds this like very small town in the Scottish Highlands that's kind of struggling to stay afloat. They don't really experience tourism like other parts of Scotland do, and they're feeling the pressure from like bigger companies to kind of commercialize, and they don't want to lose their tradition. Great premise. there are just so many problems that I had with this book. First of all, we're not gonna have this cover. We're not gonna have this premise. And tell me why there wasn't a kiss until like page 200. You're gonna make me wait 200 pages of a 300-page book for a smooch? Don't call yourself a romance. Goodbye. That and the main character was just super, super unlikable. She was just so immature and childish and just frustrating as a person. And I think that as somebody who's 25, if I were to behave that way at 35, I would be thoroughly frustrated by myself. I also don't like miscommunication tropes, in the sense that like your miscommunication is you can't have a conversation. That's just not miscommunication, that's not communication. And that's kind of the problem here. And the whole crux of their like third act breakup is that Ruby keeps a secret from her love interest because she made a pinky promise with somebody that she doesn't know all that well. And she held up that pinky promise over like being honest in her relationship, and I just thought that was stupid, frankly. I also read One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serle. This is my first Rebecca Serle. I really liked the concept of this. This is about a girl named Kate who goes to Italy, to the, I want to say the Amalfi Coast, after her mother has passed away from cancer. This was a big trip they were supposed to do together. And while after her mother dies, she kind of has this whole reset on her life of like, what am I doing? Am I happy in my marriage? Am I happy in my career? All of these things. And she still goes on the trip without her mother, just kind of like in memory of her mom. But while she's there, she like meets a younger version of her mom, and they go on the trip together, and it's unclear if it's like magic or time travel or whatever. I loved the setting of this book. I felt like I was in Italy, like I felt like I was drinking an Aperol Spritz and like was looking at the Mediterranean. I really enjoyed it. It felt like Katie went on this whole big European adventure to learn something about herself, to change her life, and at the end she ends up kind of in the same exact place. And I just thought that was really dissatisfying. Like, you went on this whole almost mystical adventure with your dead mother, a ghost, of a phantom, I don't know, of your mom, and you end up doing the exact same thing. I feel like that should have changed something in her life. Maybe she didn't leave her marriage, but maybe she changed something. But that didn't really happen, and I just wasn't my favorite. And now we're on to, I don't want to say the worst book that I read this year, but definitely the most disappointing book for me this year, because I also read the first one and I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and then I was so excited for the sequel and was just kind of let down by it. And that is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. Listen here, one thing we are not gonna do is we're not gonna hate on people for reading Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. We're just not gonna do it. If you're here for it, goodbye. I really enjoyed Fourth Wing and I was excited for Iron Flame, for the sequel. I don't think it was as bad as people on the internet made it out to be. Many people were speculating if this was written by AI. I was not falling for any of those gimmicks, but I did just feel like after Fourth Wing and the success of Fourth Wing, this sequel was so highly anticipated and overhyped, and it just kind of fell flat. Especially, I'm trying to think about it as in a fantasy series. If you're going to have a 5 to 6 book series, there's got to be some filler episodes. And I think this was just a really long filler episode, truthfully. Not every book can be like the gripping, like it can't feel like the series is coming to a close every single book. A little bit did that thing that I don't love in fantasy series. It was the problem with From Blood and Ash for me this year. We need to feel like we fulfill a series count, so we throw random twists in it to create the need for more books. I don't like that. And if it's not satisfying an overall plot arc across your books in your series, if you're just throwing in a twist at the end of book 2 to create problems you have to solve in book 3 and 4 that aren't already established in the foundation of your series, that can get frustrating for me, because it feels almost like a money grab. Like if you're throwing things in just to write more books and sell more books, but like distract from the core story you're writing, is frustrating for me. I'm not going to spoil this because I think a lot of people are still interested in reading Iron Flame, but there was a moment at the end where I was like, girl, why did you do this? Like, this is not what we were doing. This was not the goal, and you threw this in at the end, and it's going to create more problems for us that you are now going to have to solve in books 3, 4, and 5. It also was really, at times, very boring and very slow. In this book, Zaden and Violet are separated as Zaden has graduated from Basgiath, and Violet is still there, but they have to see each other every 2 weeks or so because their dragons are bonded. If they weren't together, nothing happened. Like, we would just skip 2 weeks of time, or we would finally get to that moment where we're supposed to see each other and a wrench has been thrown in the plan and we don't actually see each other. So we're doing like really, really big time skips, and we finally feel like something's about to happen on that one weekend that they're together, and they don't end up seeing each other. So then we skip ahead again. There were also, I felt like, a lot of moments in this book, and I believe I said this with Fourth Wing in my Fourth Wing reading vlog, where Rebecca Yarros would put in a time skip and then like recap something important that happened. Instead of writing that scene and showing it to me, you're telling me about it. And I feel like a lot of those, because there are a lot of lore and world building discoveries that are made in this book, but we don't actually always see them unfold. We're either told about them in like a flashback to what happened the previous week, or like a little quick recap, or somebody else tells us a discovery. It was a lot of telling, not showing. Violet a little bit faded in her power for me in this book compared to Fourth Wing. Most of her intensity or her intimidation comes from the fact that she is dating Zaden Violet, and not from that she's one of the most powerful writers bonded to one of the most powerful dragons in the universe. And that just felt a little lame. Like, we're gonna be in 2023 and we're gonna attribute this girl's power to her boyfriend? I don't think so. I was bummed by this one. I gave this 3 stars, probably closer to 2.5. I did still like it. I am going to still continue with the series, but unfortunately I think the 3rd book doesn't come out until December 2024, which with my brain means I'm going to have to reread Fourth Wing and this again. And I'm already not looking forward to rereading this. Now we're going to talk about the books that I really did enjoy this year. And I have 8 of them that we're going to talk about right now. The first book I don't have is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a low stakes, low fantasy series about an orc named Viv who's kind of hung up their adventuring sword to open a cafe in a small little village. She opens a coffee shop and she introduces coffee to these people, and she creates kind of like a staple of the community. It is cozy, it is sweet, it is whimsical, escapist fantasy. That I was reading while I was moving out of Boston. I would read Legends and Lattes and just freaking escape, and it was magical. I also started playing D&D with my friends this year. We started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it felt like I was in like a little side quest of Dungeons and Dragons, and it was so sweet. My friends and I are actually Sisterhood of the Traveling Pantsing this book, passing it around, and I did just pick up the sequel, which is Bookshops and Bone Dust, so I'm looking forward to reading that. That was a 5-star read for me this year. The next book I don't have is on this list because I did enjoy it and I think it was good, but also because I'm really proud of myself for reading it. I read Fairytale by Stephen King, which is his most recent, I think his most recent release, but also his most recent fantasy release. It's definitely not horror scary time. I'm not a horror person. So when I saw Fairytale, I wanted to read it, which I did. I was really proud of myself for reading a very long book and for reading a Stephen King. I never read a Stephen King before. Fairytale follows this boy who notices their elderly neighbor, who is kind of like the town recluse, has fallen in their yard and broken their hip or their leg or something like that, and they actually end up in the hospital, and the boy takes care of the elderly man's older dog. and kind of like stays in his creepy house with the dog, takes care of her. He also helps this man when he comes home, and then when the man eventually dies, he takes ownership of the dog, and he finds in the man's backyard like a tunnel to a magical world where there is a sort of like a sundial that you can use to turn time backwards or forwards, and he wants to bring the old dog to this sundial to kind of bring her back to life and make her young again because he loves this dog so much. That's me. I'll go on a quest to save a dog, damn it. It was a very long book, but I just thought the world was really rich. The concept was interesting, like it was different. Like the whole thought of a quest just to save a dog, but also save a whole magical world at the same time was very interesting. It was paced really, really well. There were enough, like, I think, core plot events to keep you going that we gotta solve this problem, and then we have to go do this thing, and they all are towards the greater solution to the novel. The next book that I read was The Five Survive by Holly Jackson. Now, I did not love A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, but I really enjoyed Five Survive. Five Survive was a standalone mystery that I believe came out in April. It's about these 6 friends who go on a road trip, and they get a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. They have no service. It's nighttime. It's dark. They go fix the flat tire, and then they realize that all of their tires have been shot out and that they actually are not there by accident. Somebody has hunted them there and is trying to get them because one of them has a secret. Holly Jackson's writing in this book, I just felt like was so strong. There were moments, and I will never forget this. I was on the T in Boston heading to work reading this book, and I genuinely had fear, like, oh my god, like I felt like I was in the woods. Our main character goes out to go like pee in the woods by herself, and I'm like, girl, don't do that. Like, it's one of those kind of that anticipation and that nervousness, that suspense where you're like watching a horror movie and you're like, don't go in the basement. And I just really loved it. The vibes were just like creepy, high stakes, thrillery. I also had to know what happened, and I read this book in 24 hours. And the process of going through this book, trying to like weed out and puzzle out for myself who has the secret, who do I think that the person is looking for, kind of their plan to get around this situation, I really enjoyed. I also like this in mysteries, but there were kind of like evidence or case documents included in the pages of the story. So I felt extra like a detective, and I just thought it was a really great, engaging reading experience and a really solid YA mystery thriller. The last book that I don't have is Wayward by Emilia Hart. I read this more recently. I think it was like October, November. I listened to this on audio, and I really enjoyed this. It gave me the same kind of vibe as The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner that I read in 2022, but this is it follows 3 descendants of the same family line. One from like the 1600s who's being tried for witchcraft, one who's in like the early 1900s, late 1800s, who is kind of a noblewoman living on an estate, and just kind of like held captive by the societal expectations of her as a woman. A more modern character who is escaping a domestic violent situation. She finds out she is pregnant and is trying to like raise her baby away from everybody, and just keep herself and her baby hidden in secret from her abusive ex-boyfriend. These 3 stories were interwoven really successfully, and just kind of like the discovery of self for each of these characters along the way, to learn about their history, their heritage, their like familial ties, to learn about each other, like backwards, for the modern character to learn about the one in the 1800s, the one in the 1800s to learn about the one in the 1600s. The ancestry, legacy, lineage aspect of the book was very cool. They're also just like kind of weird, witchy kind of people, which was fun. Was a great spooky vibe. I found the perspectives to be really balanced, and that I didn't prefer one over the other, which isn't what usually happens for me in multi-POV books. I'm usually looking to get back to a particular POV, but I really enjoyed all of them. She did a really great job of ending each chapter on kind of like a reveal or a cliffhanger. So I was like, oh, I really want to get back to theirs. But then the next chapter would happen. I'm like, wait, no, I really want to get back to theirs. And when it would come back to the new person, I'd be like, wait, I want to know what happened with that thing that you left off on. It was just a really, really engaging reading experience. That was the one that when I was looking back through my list, I did not, when I read it, I didn't think that this would end up on my top 10 books of the year. But as I was looking through the list, I was like, no, I really, really enjoyed that book. We're going to start with a book that I did not, again, when I was reading it, think it would be on my best books of the year list. We had The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Listen, I did a read with me for this video for the beginning. I've said it multiple times on this channel and I will say it again. This book begins with a suicide attempt. You watch our main character go through a mental breakdown and attempt suicide. That prompts this whole like almost like a hallucinogenic self-reflection, self-exploration, where she ultimately decides to live, which is great. But that was really jarring, especially as somebody who's had mental health issues, to read that and to see that on the page. I never heard anybody talk about that. When Nora decides to die, she ends up in this library filled with all of these green books, and each book is an alternative ending to her life had she done different things, had she made choices differently in her life. And what she kind of learns is that there are like infinite possibilities of your life, and you can worry about all the choices you didn't make or that you made the wrong one and how your life could have turned out, but that still may not be the perfect life. So you can't regret the choices that you didn't make in the past. You can only go forward and keep making choices to try and have a better life for yourself. And it's really cool to see different ways that her life could have turned out. And it's just, I think overall, the big selling point of this book and why it is on my best books is for that message at the end. You can't fix the choices you've already made. You can't go back and correct them all the time, but you can go forward and choose to live your life intentionally and make choices that better serve the kind of life that you want to have. I did annotate this book. I got a little bit into annotating this year, but I think this would be a book that I would definitely reread or use to refresh my mindset in a slump. I think this would be a great one. I can see why people put this on their like most life-changing books list, but I do think that that warning, that trigger warning, needs to be given. Next is the first book that I read in its entirety in 2023. This came out on my birthday last year, and I specifically went to Barnes & Noble to get this, and then I read this in about one day, I think. And she's a decent sized book. This is 9 Liars by Maureen Johnson. This is another mystery thriller. This is just over 450 pages. It is a continuation of the Truly Devious series, but this is like one of the standalone self-contained mysteries that follow at the end of the core trilogy. This is the most recent book in that series, and this follows Stevie Bell. Actually, I'm remembering the ending of the book. There will be another one. This follows Stevie Bell, who is studying at Ellingham Academy, and she, as part of her like curriculum there as a gifted student specializing in mystery solving, goes to England to visit her boyfriend who's studying at, I don't remember where, Cambridge maybe? She goes to England to visit him, and while she's there meets his friend, and this friend's aunt had been involved or present for an estate murder where 2 of her friends in the 70s were murdered. So Stevie solves like a 30-year-old mystery. She stays at an estate with her friends in the like English countryside. The setting really set this one up for me. This was so cool to like see her in England, see her on this estate and solve this mystery. I love the way that Maureen Johnson writes these mysteries, because you kind of travel back in time a little bit where you're piecing together something, and then you come back to the present and Stevie Bell finds something in the present time that reveals that same piece of information or closes the loop that you started to get in the flashback. It's just really, really good, and I find with every single one of these mysteries, you can't solve it without Stevie Bell, I don't think. Like, you don't have all of the pieces. Like, you do need Maureen to help you get there, but you feel like you're getting so close every single time. And it's like, just throughout the whole book, the way that Stevie figures these things out, mind-blowing, because I'm like, how can you be so smart? Because I am just not. That's really, really enjoyable, but it also doesn't feel like an assumption, and it doesn't feel like out of the realm of possibility or unrealistic for her to make these connections and figure these things out. She goes about it very, very methodically, like very, very deliberately, and it feels realistic in the murder mystery solving. I love reading these books because they make me, like, I feel like I'm along for the ride in the mystery solving, but I'm not steering that train. I'm along for the ride. I feel like part of the crew, though I'm not carrying my weight, and I don't mind it. But it did leave off on a very epic cliffhanger and not, so I'm very, very curious about this and what will happen next. But I gave this 5 stars. My first full read in 2024. My first full read in 2023. I did review this book on my channel. I'm going to talk about this book, and this is on here with the caveat that I have not finished it yet. I'm not super far into it either. I will be very transparent. I'm only about 1/3 of the way through, but the way that this is reading and the writing style and just like the concept, the premise in this book for what it is, lends itself to be on my top 10 list for the year. And that is The Assassins Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I have been wanting to read this book literally all year, and I'm finally doing it. For a while, this book was only in mass market paperback format. They did not have it in a trade paperback format, so they had it in the really like squished tiny edition. I cannot read those. Those books make you want to jump out a window. So I waited and waited and waited for the trade paperback, and then my Barnes & Noble only had the second and third book and not the first one. So it's been a long wait to read this book, but I finally have it, and I'm in the middle of it right now, and I'm enjoying it. I will say the writing is very stylistic. It is very crafted and artfully done, so it does take a little bit more brain power. It's not like you're reading just like No Tea No Shade. It's not like you're reading Fourth Wing where things are laid out very plainly in simple language. It's a little bit more complex, a little bit more stylistic. The syntax and the sentence structure is a little bit inverted to kind of match the time that we're supposed to be in. So it's a different level of fantasy reading, if that makes sense. So this is also probably one of the highest fantasy books that I've read this year. I would say that's a little bit more elevated and complicated than Fairytale by Stephen King, Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. So this is one I've really been excited to read, and it is, while it is really elevated, it is a great story. This book follows, it's a trilogy. It's the Farseer trilogy, and I think there are other ones set in this universe, but this follows Fitz, who is he's an orphan, but he's also the bastard of the Crown Prince chivalry in this kingdom of the Six Duchies. So his father is in line to be the king, and Fitz is his bastard born son, and he's kind of abandoned on the doorstep of the keep by his mother. His father does not ever acknowledge him. He never meets his father. The father ends up abdicating the throne because of this birth of this bastard son, and while he's living in this keep kind of as an outcast, very lonely with very little love, it's very sad, he's taken in by the king and kind of made a bargain with him to learn to be a spy and an assassin to help the king, in exchange for the king kind of like recognizing him, feeding him, caring for him. Problematic in and of itself. Fitz also has something called the Skill, which is like it typically follows the royal bloodline, but is some sort of like magic or power that he has. So at the point that I'm in, Fitz has just begun his like assassin training, and he's still kind of like growing up through his youth, his adolescenthood. But we follow Fitz from being very young to 5 or 6 through his time being a young adult, as he's kind of finding his place, navigating and serving as the king's assassin. I'm really enjoying it. It feels like the fantasy video games and D&D games that I've been playing and watching and enjoying. It feels like the fantasy that I have been kind of craving, and I'm really proud for reading an adult fantasy because I find adult fantasy to be a little intimidating sometimes. And the last book, we're not gonna roast me for it. We're just not gonna do that, okay? Because I know some of y'all girlies will be feeling the same way. It's Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. When I look back at all of the books that I read this year, nothing captivated my interest the way that Fourth Wing did. This took over my brain space. For the little over 24 hours I was reading this book, I was like, I gotta know what's happening. What's gonna happen next? And I feel like compared to the plot of Iron Flame, so much happened in Violet's first year. All of the challenges and all of the, you know, trials she had to go through in her first year at Basquiat and like becoming a dragon rider were so engaging. Then we had this romance that was like passionate and spicy and like fun, was great. We also have this like impending new war and world happening, and like really taking a stand as a young person and standing up for what's right and calling out like the corruptness in the world. I just thought was really compelling. I really liked it. Is it the best book in the world? Is it the best written book? Probably not, but it is my best book of the year because it just took over. I was just so thoroughly enjoyed this book. I was gripped by it. I was thinking about it for a really long time. It's been a long time since there's been a book that I've like tried to hypothesize theories about what's coming next, but this book did it. It felt for me very similar to my first experience reading A Court of Thorns and Roses and A Court of Mist and Fury, where I was just like consumed by a book. It hasn't happened in a long time, but Fourth Wing did it for me this year, and this is my top book that I read, and that's that. So it's been a bit, but let me know what were some of the best and worst books that you read this year. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you had a different experience with any of the books that I did not enjoy, let me know. Let's talk about it. Like I said, leave me your best and worst books in the comments down below with a little coffee cup emoji, and I will see you guys in my next video on Sunday, which is going to be my 2024 goals, reset, and vision board for the new year. So, I will see you guys in my next one. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and happy reading. Bye-bye.